Welcome to the Innovative Leader Podcast, featuring Christy Geiger, Executive Coach with Synergy Strategies, and David Phillips, Professor, Consultant, and Coach.
Welcome. We are sitting here at the end of May, and I'm with David Phillips, and this is Christy Geiger with the Innovative Leader Podcast, coming to leaders to equip, inspire, and transform. Today, we're at an interesting point with COVID stuff continues to continue. Some places are beginning to open more, different feelings about that. Minneapolis is going crazy, which I am a bit more tuned into just because my family is in Minneapolis. I was in Minneapolis for a while with the Black Lives Matter and just fairness and what is going on, and really a lot of looting and fires and craziness. I'm sure everyone is aware of that. But so today it brought us to this topic that David and I are both very passionate about in leadership and neuroscience. And in leadership, really we're doing our very best to lead, but as we're aware of the neuroscience of our mind and what's happening in our mind, it equips us to lead better. And with different things that are going on and, in different organizations, as people are trying to navigate COVID, beginning to come back to work. When do you come back to work? What does that look like? How do we make good decisions? Do we innovate? Do we change what we're doing? Whatever. Leaders are making these tough decisions. And sometimes in the midst of making these tough decisions, things can go south. They get ugly, they get tense, people get upset, arguments start, you may not argue, you may completely shut down. People respond in different ways. Some people laugh, exactly like humor. We all respond differently when things are going south. But the fact is that sometimes things go south. And so what we wanted to talk about today was just the ability for leaders to grow in their awareness of what's going on when things go south in the human mind and human emotions, and then how to navigate that better. So David, kind of getting into this topic, what do you think about this whole topic of our frontal lobe and our limbic system and how that plays out in the workforce and in leadership?
Yeah, so it's one of those lightly regarded aspects of our humanity that has not been dealt with very well in the past. We like to think we're rational people and that we're logical, and we come to rational conclusions and those kinds of things. But the reality is we really don't. We come to emotional conclusions, and we try to rationalize those emotions. And so when we talk about leadership, we have to be aware of our own mental state, our own mental health or awareness, and the emotions that we're feeling. And then we also have to be aware of the emotions of the people that we lead, because they're varied, their experiences are varied, and no two situations and no two people are exactly the same. And so that there has to be that awareness of emotion, both on ourselves and on the people we lead, to effectively lead and to get things accomplished and to get things done. And as things go south, then we have to be prepared to understand what's going on, and maybe, just maybe, both in ourselves and in others, we can help that journey south to not be so far. That maybe by understanding what's going on, by helping other people understand what's going on in their own mental state or their own emotional state, that journey can be shortened. And I think that's huge, because if you go south, everybody's going to go south. Everything is going to go south at some point in our lives. The farther south we go, the deeper we go into depression and in those kinds of situations, the harder it is to get out of it. And so things are not going to go well sometimes, but we have to be mentally aware so that we don't just lose everything. And I think that's the challenge of leadership. It's the challenge of leadership in challenging times.
Yeah, agree. I think that's very true about why is this worth studying? Why is this worth being aware of? And that this really is part of emotional intelligence and
Right.
what we do to develop our ability to emotionally manage ourselves, emotionally understand others. And your point about the further south we go, it increases conflict, it increases
Right.
not understanding. And the more, person A with person B, both of them are getting in, say, that limbic system mode, the further south it goes. And if one person doesn't recognize they're in that mode, you just keep going further south.
Right. Yeah. And I think about Minneapolis right now. Back to your idea, your statement about Minneapolis. That I don't know what was going through those officers' minds. There's no way I think that we could go through that. I know that. I mean, I have some friends who are officers. I know every time they step out of the car, they're worried they're not going to come back home. I mean, that's just very real. But I wish I could have a chance just to sit down and say, what was going through your mind at that time? And what were you feeling at that point? Because I think if we could ask those questions of ourselves and of others, that maybe we could learn and we could grow, and not do those things again. And obviously, the status of those officers are, it's they were fired and the potential prosecution at that point. So they'll probably never be an officer again. But it would be, that's why the FBI set up that behavioral science unit years ago to kind of study some of these things, to try to figure out why criminals do crime, why people react the way they do, why police behave the way they do, those kinds of things. And it's not just about crime. It's about every aspect of our lives, whether we're fighting with our spouse or fighting with a friend. We have to understand why we do the things we do, because they're emotionally based. And so it is that emotional intelligence you were talking about. And that's key to understanding ourselves and leading ourselves, and then also leading others.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it is an interesting reflection to think about the police force and to think about that service field, because I do believe as leaders, we are responsible to manage ourselves first. That is part of leadership. And so, yes, do we want to train and mentor and equip our followers to have great emotional intelligence? Absolutely. But leaders are responsible to manage themselves first and to grow that emotional intelligence. And we've talked about in the past with the limbic system and frontal lobe, how it always fascinates me in military training and what they go through, the SEALs training being a kind of a peak height of the different types of trainings. But whether you're in fire, rescue, police, and then moving up into military, to the Marines, to the SEALs, to whatever, and forgive me if I'm saying any of those wrong, since I am not seasoned in that, but very thankful and respectful of it. But they train to not have their brain triggered. Right. So when they are in the cage drowning, they are training, because the natural mind, really what we're talking about is the frontal lobe and the limbic system. Now, this is an oversimplification. The brain is much more complex than that. Right. But for basic application, in order to apply it in leadership and in our humanity, let's just take those two areas of your frontal lobe and your limbic system. And the reality is, while our limbic system is the host of our emotions, it's the host of our senses, it's the door to our subconscious, which really runs, what is it, like 80 or 90% of our reality really stems out of our subconscious. So we've got these two systems, and in the limbic system, there is something that a lot of psychologists and people will reference as the lizard brain. Right. Other places will call it like your saboteurs or your gremlins or whatever, but there's this piece of our brain that is naturally innate to survival. And it's even been talked about why humans are naturally negative. Why when you stand in the grocery store, there's a leaning towards negativity. Well, the survival bias looks for the threat. It looks for what could go wrong. So I'm scanning for the threat in order to protect my survival. And so this part of our brain is this survival piece of the brain, but it also is the part that is looking for things to be afraid of,
Right.
things to be fearful of. And so if we can talk, really we've got the limbic brain and the frontal lobe are these two areas of our mind. And going back to what you were talking about with the military and the police, they're training so that when their limbic brain gets hijacked, so suddenly they feel, and really specifically the lizard part of the brain, which is the part that has the fear, the fight, the flight, the amygdala hijack piece of it, when that is happening and they're like, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here. Oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening. Oh my gosh, I need certainty. When that gets activated, how do I get myself over here into the frontal lobe? Because the frontal lobe is really responsible for rational thinking, for logical thinking, for the ability to see the big picture of what's going on. It's our calm, centered, focused place where we are in a more, I like to call it sage. I'm borrowing that term from Positive Intelligence and Shirzad Shamin, where he talks about the sage and the saboteur.
Mm-hmm.
But our sage mind is that much more level place. So there's a seesaw constantly going on. How do you see that, David, with leaders and the seesaw of the frontal lobe and the limbic system? How does that show up that you've seen or observed in the workplace?
So it shows up when stress happens, either on in a team or with the leader. The leader can get very stressed, and so the default at that point oftentimes is that lizard brain. It's survival. We just got to get it done. It comes when people are concerned about their power or their control. That's another place where it shows up, and it shows up there in a huge way, probably more often than we would like to admit, because we start thinking of ways to keep that and even to sabotage other people so that we can maintain those powers of control. You see it show up a lot too in passive aggressive comments, backhanded compliments as well. So it shows up in how people are addressed, how people are how people work together. People get sick even. It becomes a psychophysiological effect in some cases, and they don't show it from work or what they do things that are self-destructive behaviors when there's flight, fight, or freeze. So it shows up in those areas, and so as a leader, we have to be able to decipher that in ourselves first of all. One of the things that I like to ask people when people start talking about their own behavior is, why do you think you did that? It's just a general question. Why do you think you did that? And then you begin to lead them down this path of, well, I did that because of this. Okay, well, then why did you do that? And you just keep walking down that, why did I do that? And oftentimes you actually come to a scenario that is probably a decade old. And you're actually kind of reacting out of that, and that lizard brain takes over and pushes you into fight, flight, or freeze, and that emotional hijack that goes on, and so that's, as a leader, we have to do that. One of the things that I did when I was doing my doctor work in this is I started writing down. I took everything that I did and I wrote it down. And then I would ask myself why. And I just journaled it. I would ask myself, I would come in and I noticed a pattern in my own life. I'd come in the afternoon from doing something, and I would go, the first thing I'd do is go to the fridge. Why? Why is this habit? Why is this built in them? And I trace it all the way back to being a latchkey kid, coming home from school. And that was the first inclination. I was there by myself. I was wanting comfort. I was wanting, that emotional, the jolt from emotional eating, those kinds of things. I traced it all the way back. And so So as a leader, I think we have to start there. Why am I doing this? But we've got to get in our right mind to be able to do that. And we're going to talk about that as well.
Yeah. I think journaling is a great tip and a great tool to use in reflection and trying to observe and notice when we're in our two states of mind. When do I feel sage versus when do I feel like my lizard brain is going off? And then asking that question, why did I do that? What was my intention? What was I thinking about? What was I hoping would happen? What's going on with that? Because it is true that our lizard brain in general is developed from early on. And whether it's a combination of our personalities and the blind spots of our personalities, so you may be kind of lizard, like you were mentioning, where some people may shut down and get sick. Some people become very aggressive. Some people shut down. Some people avoid. Whatever. We respond differently, which is the nature of part of our personality. But then it takes kind of the ditch or the shadow of that personality coupled with our experiences, and that lizard brain is working hard to protect us.
Right.
And it's working hard to make sure that we're safe, even though the lizard brain is not actually really the best person to listen to. It's kind of like listening to that neighborhood friend who you have a lot of fun with, but they're probably not the best voice to be listening to.
Yeah.
To me, that's your lizard brain. It's trying to protect you. It's trying to give you good advice, but it really is not the sage advice that you need.
Right.
It does remind me of SCARF. We've talked about that before, but just real quick, that SCARF is that seesaw. And you mentioned a couple of things. The power and control is usually a status trigger. So I go to my frontal lobe if I feel like I'm important and that we have an equal relationship. I feel triggered, or I go to that limbic mode if I feel like my opinion isn't valuable, I'm not important, I'm lesser than, or someone has power over me. C is certainty. When I feel certainty, I know what's going on. I know the agenda for the meeting. I know that we're having this review. Whatever, I go to my frontal lobe. I'm calm and good to go. Certainty, I don't know what's happening. I can get triggered. I don't feel safe. I don't know what's going on. I feel like everything around me is uncertain. I'm going to move into that survival mode. Autonomy, do I feel like I have a voice and I have the ability to contribute and I can say my truth and what I need to say? Or autonomy. Hijack is, it doesn't matter what I have to say and I'm being told what to do. It's time to leave, let's go. And you're like, wait a minute, I'm not ready to go. We can get autonomy hijacked, relatedness, am I part of the tribe or not? And fairness, was that fair? Was that not? The Minneapolis thing, huge in the fairness trigger, as you mentioned earlier. So what in the world do we do when that happens? So now we're journaling, we recognize, okay, wow, have this limbic brain I'm constantly fighting and noticing, have this frontal lobe sage place I really want to be, but it's hard to be there. So what the heck do I do when I get triggered?
Yeah, so I know we've talked about it just in prepping for the podcast a couple, but I'm going to throw a couple more out real quick to kind of start, and then we'll, and they just popped into my head, and I think they're important. I had a professor one time who said, never make a decision until you've had a good meal and you've rested. And a lot of times we make really bad decisions when we're hungry and tired. And I think that two of the big things we can do is to eat right and get good rest, because that, I know that when I am tired, my limbic system, my lizard brain can be right there on edge, because we don't have the energy to hold back that emotional stress when things happen. And we get in fights in our families oftentimes just because we're tired. The kids are tired, we're tired, we don't want to deal with them, get out of my way, it just, things blow up. And then I'm going to add actually a third one, and that's go for a walk or exercise. There is something about going for a walk, even a 15 or 20 minute walk, that energizes your brain. and helps get it in the right state.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it's important to walk away sometimes, just to walk away, walk around the house, walk around the block, walk down the street, whatever it takes, just to get yourself out of that situation and take a break. And mentally, it does wonders for the brain. I used to walk when I worked at an office. I would eat lunch for 20 minutes. I would go walk for 20 minutes, and I would sit in my car and close my eyes and try to nap for 20 minutes. And it does wonders for your afternoon brain, by the way, just FYI. So
Yeah.
I'm going to throw those three out there because we didn't talk about them, and I apologize for that. They just popped in my head.
No, I think it's great. To me, those are all part of what I like to refer to as our foundation. David Rock actually addresses that too, and I think that'd be a great topic for next week if we want to, but it's called the Healthy Mind Platter, and it is square what you're talking about as far as our eating and our sleeping, our exercise, our downtime, our in time processing and mindfulness. So yeah, absolutely. It's like, if you are showing up kind of a mess, you're going to get hijacked really quickly.
Right.
Versus if you had good sleep, you're not hangry, you've taken a walk, you have great neurochemicals going on in your brain because you worked out and you already shedded your toxins, you are showing up in a much better place to be sage and not to get hijacked. Versus if you're tired, you're hangry, you're irritated, you haven't worked out, you've just come off a 10-hour shift and you've got one more phone call before the end of the day, pretty much lizard is right on the edge to jump. Yeah.
And also, you know, the other thing is to be aware of the medications you're taking. And we're going to get into some other things, but those just popped into my head because I have a herniated disc, and so every once in a while I have to take it's a nerve pain pill. But if I have to take that at certain times of the day, I feel like I'm just out of it, and it gets me emotional that I'm right on the edge. So, you know, be aware of all the things that we put in our body, be aware of all the things that we do with our body. Because that's going to impact our ability to shut down that lizard brain and to be able to think and have a rational, make rational and good decisions.
Yeah, that's good. I think it kind of actually goes to the step one that we were talking about. And the step one, when you get hijacked in that limbic system, is to label it, to acknowledge it. Yep. And what you're talking about, even with the medications, like if I'm aware that I am on a medication and it causes me to be more tired, it causes me to not pay attention, or that I need to eat more frequently, or when I am hungry, I do get more hangry. And so all of a sudden I'm biting at you rather than acknowledging, oh boy, you know what? I think I am actually a little hangry. I'm sorry. Let me go grab a granola bar and then let's continue this conversation, or whatever it is. But a lot of times with our limbic system, it is simply, David Rock talks about naming it to tame it. Mm-hmm. That really we're labeling it. We don't need to go and justify it. We don't need to defend it. Like you said earlier with emotions, we tend to rationalize and minimize. So you don't need to go into all of those places. It's really just label it. Wow, I'm feeling a little status triggered. I feel like my voice isn't being heard. I feel like we're arguing. What's going on? I feel like I'm in competition. Naming it is that first one. And I think your point on acknowledgement and just awareness is huge in order to label it.
Yeah, no, exactly. So you name it. This is what's going on right now. Whether you do it out loud, whether you write it down, whether you just in your brain say, this is what's going on. That's the first step, indeed, to take that and then begin to take some other steps to quiet that reaction or that lizard brain.
Yeah, and step number 2 is interesting because a lot of times, and even in psychology, we tend to think that we need to dig into that, like, why did that happen? What's going on? And we really want to unpack it and go deep. And a lot of times that actually is not very useful. It just almost gives more energy and spotlighting to something that we're not really desiring to spotlight. So the step number 2 is really backing up. And this goes back to what you were saying too about going for a walk, is really the practice of mindfulness. And what we're trying to do is specifically in your brain, this is all in neuroscience. This is not just fluffy mumbo jumbo psychology stuff.
Right.
This is literally in your brain. The more gray space you have, which is developed through presence and mindfulness, the more ability you have to return to that frontal lobe.
Right.
The more reactionary you are, which we all have it, right? We've got our phones, we're constantly popping on, all these distractions, we do it to ourselves. We are reducing physically the gray space in our brains. And so we don't have the ability neurologically to be mindful and get sage again.
Right.
And so really step number 2 is, 1, we label it and that's it. I got hijacked. I feel scarf triggered, whatever. Now you come into mindfulness. And mindfulness, like you were saying, you gave a great example about going for a walk. Sometimes that can be, for me as a Christian, it could be reading a Bible passage.
Right.
It could be listening to Christian music. There's a ton of good research on sensory, where you're just rubbing your hands together, or you're doing something to be aware of your 5 senses, but you're just practicing mindfulness. The whole meditation thing can be useful. What things do you use for mindfulness? What helps you to get kind of in that frontal lobe centered, sage, calm place?
So the thing that I have a chair. It's on the other side of the camera. I call it my thinking chair. And I've had it since college. It's been recovered.
I love that it has a name.
Yeah, it's my thinking chair. And I will sit there. I'll put on, oddly enough, people are gonna laugh when I say this. I'll put on like Kenny G, or some very quiet music. Enya is another one of my favorites that I kind of go to, and I just sit there and I think. I had sometimes I will put on a friend years ago gave me this CD, and it was by a guy named Dr. Lemon, and it was a guided meditation. And basically you sit in the chair and you think, relax, just relax. And it was 20 minutes of that. And it got to the point where I could be driving in my car and I would hear the word relax and my body would go limp. I don't know that it wasn't hypnosis. It was just, it was a trigger that when I heard the word relax, I could lean back in my chair and I could start thinking, relax, just relax. And my body it would quiet down. I would get incredibly relaxed. So I do those things. For me, walking is a great tool. I just go for walks and I think and I process, and it takes the emotion out of it because you're using your body in all different ways. The energy is directed into your muscles and things like that, as opposed to directed into that limbic system, that amygdala area. And so you're able to get some things out. But that's really what I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of years ago when I went to a yoga class at the work site where I was, and we did yoga. And there was, of course, yoga when you do it right. And this instructor was very big on the deep breathing piece of it. And so we did that, and we actually were doing it several times a week. And I tend to be a high strung person. So what I noticed is, because we were doing this and it plays on your relaxing, this deep breathing and the yoga, when I would start to get anxious, I didn't have a key word like you did, but when I would start to get anxious or worked up, my body would instantly start deep breathing and calm me back down. which is interesting. Like we can train our bodies, we can train our minds, but we physically have to go. There's a neural pathway that goes this way to the limbic system. There's the neural pathway that essentially, it's not like it's leading to the limbic system. It's just a limbic system response or a frontal lobe response. And we get to choose, are we taking that lizard response or the sage response? And when we're doing activities, we're conditioning our mind to take the sage response rather than that lizard response. So those are great. So real quick, just because our time, we just have a couple minutes left. The third step then really comes down into the last thing is the opportunity to visualize. And on those pathways, not only can we do things with our body that helps us to take that sage response, but we can actually create a practice that helps us to do that better. And with visualization, you can either proactively visualize in the morning, where do I think that I might get hijacked today? What do I think might get me worked up, and how do I want to respond? How would my sage self respond? Or processing the past and rewriting the story. If we were to go through that again, how would my sage respond versus how does my lizard respond?
Mm-hmm.
And that whole visualization. What's your thoughts on visualization and how the effectiveness of that? Have you experienced it?
Yeah, so we were talking before about a basketball study. And this professor at University of Chicago in the 50s did a study. He had one person practice his free throws every day for 30 days. The other visualized himself doing free throws for 30 days, and one person did nothing. The person who physically practiced, had an improvement of 24%. The person who just visualized had an improvement of 23%. And obviously the guy who did nothing didn't improve in any way. But so I was going to tell you this story. I told you I had a story about this. So I was doing my doctoral work in this area, and I had read a study about visualization, and I thought, this is crazy. I don't buy it, but I'm going to try it. And so I laid in bed one night, and I visualized myself doing 200 sit-ups. And the next morning, I woke up and my abs hurt like crazy.
What?
Yes, no joke.
Okay, actually, it's in a book. There's some book that talks about that, because we were listening to this audiobook and Audibles on our trip, and it talked about how you can visualize working out and still get the effect. And I was like, well, this is great. We're on this 18-hour road trip, so I'm just going to visualize myself doing sit-ups. And of course, I only did it for 2 seconds, so I didn't actually have that effect. But seriously, so your legs actually hurt.
Oh, my abs.
Oh, your abs.
Yeah. And the basis of the study was they had people actually practice doing things like this to increase strength in their fingers. And then they had another group that just visualized doing that. And the strength in the finger increased at almost the same rate as the person who was actually doing the exercise. And I thought, that's crazy. That's just insane. I'm going to try this. And I did. I did 200 sit-ups in my brain. And the next morning I got up and my abs hurt.
Yeah.
So if I could just get the discipline to do that every night.
Right. You'd be in amazing shape. It's a new six-pack coming your way.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's really powerful. And it's interesting. Again, this is neuroscience. This isn't fluffy, positive psychology. Like, this is literal science of what's happening in our brain. But what's really cool is just the art of this seesaw that happens with our frontal lobe and the limbic system. And specifically the lizard part of our limbic system is the part that kind of takes us into an emotional downward spiral. And that's really not where we want to lead from, not where we want to show up from. It's not really the positive side of ourselves that we're proud of. It's the side that we're like, oh goodness, let me try that again.
Oh, me. So I believe in visualization. I need to do it more. But and so the way you can do that is to start your day thinking about your day, jotting down the things that what's going on in your schedule, and then just kind of pre-process that and then be ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting as leaders, there are days that we lead well, but typically I'm going to say, when I think about it, there's probably a piece of every day, and that's being very generous to say a piece, numerous pieces in a day that truly, did I get hijacked? Did my lizard brain show up? Of course it did. Was there an opportunity to do that in a more skillful way? Absolutely.
Yep.
Was there a way for me to improve my emotional intelligence by responding more in my sage frontal lobe self? Absolutely. And that's really our goal. Sometimes when we look at emotional intelligence, it seems like a very ambiguous concept. How do you improve emotional intelligence?
Right.
But this truly is part of it. Like when we are hijacked because we lack self-awareness, social management, self-management, those are the quadrants of emotional intelligence. And
Yep.
if you are not doing it well, just you look at it and say, okay, was the lizard brain going on, or was I in my sage mode? And I'm going to say, if you're in your sage, you're usually having much stronger emotional intelligence.
Right. And so Daniel Pink has written a book on, it's called When, and it's about when to do things. And one of the fascinating things that kind of is evidence of the physical aspects of decision making that he brought up, and I've seen this in other studies as well, is if you're up for parole, people get more favorable responses before a parole board at the beginning of the morning and right after lunch. And the reason is people they're just coming in, so they've eaten, they've had something to eat, they've got the nutrients to kind of kick their brain in, so they're more engaged and more open. And then at lunch, they've been able to walk away, they've been able to get good food in their body, and they come back and they have the energy and the focus to listen, be engaged, and make good decisions. And so I think all of that is important. It's not just what you do, it's when you do it. Be aware of those kinds of things as well. And then and be ready to step back, take a retrospective of your day, what you did, what was good, what was bad, why did you do those things. Again, go back to that question, why did you do it? I don't recommend doing that in the midst of an emotional breakdown or in the midst of things going south. But when you can step back, have those questions of why, and deal with those, and then get ready to start the new day and think about the things that you can tweak and change so that you can make better decisions the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a process, not a destination. Like, right. I think as long as our human,
as long as there is a lizard brain, there will be a lizard. There will be an amygdala hijack.
The lizard will show up. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. All right, good. Well, that was fun. I hope this is helpful for leaders. I know I use this for myself, and it's constantly a learning process. So hopefully this was useful to give a little insight into that frontal lobe and limbic system and grow some awareness to your lizard brain and what you can do about it.
Absolutely. And as always, you can find us on YouTube, at Apple Podcasts, at Google Play, and anywhere you get your podcasts. And we'd love for you to subscribe and keep getting these episodes of The Innovative Leader. And check out theinnovativeleader.co as well.
Awesome. All right. Have a great weekend.
You too. Later. Bye.